and how they affect managerial decision. In this chapter, we're going to look at a framework which we call structure, conduct, performance. And in the structure part, we try to find some measures or indexes that categorizes the market structure for us. And then it explains the environment that firms live in and then compete in it with each other, and whether they can enter the market or not, and all these factors that forms the market structure. We're going to discuss that. Then go with conduct, which is the behavior of the firm inside that market structure, including pricing behavior, decision about whether they do integration or not, how much money do they want to spend on research and development, and how much money they want to spend on advertising. And eventually, we're going to look at performance, which is the outcome of all decision in the previous round, in the previous stage in the conduct. Now we want to see how much benefit at the end of the day we can generate inside the company for the company, the owner of the company, or the shareholder of the company, and then outside the society. That's the framework that we're going to take a look at that. And then at the end, we're going to basically analyze this paradigm, this framework together. So I'm going to begin with the definition of market structure. Market structure refers to characteristics of the market, either organizational or competitive, that describes the nature of the competition and pricing policy followed in the market. So basically, the market structure describes the business environment that all buyers and sellers interact in it. The question is that what kind of market structures do we know? What are the characteristics that help us to categorize these market structures? So we know that the range of market structures will vary from very, very competitive to almost no competition. So that's the market structure spectrum. In one end, we have very huge competitive or competition, and in the other end, we have almost no competition at all. So what other type of market structures lie between these two extreme scenarios? That's what we're going to see that here. Market structure factors that impact managerial decisions are, number one, how many firms are operating in an industry. So if you have one, then you say that, okay, the market is very, very monopolized. If you have numerous number, then you would say that there is a high chance of competition in that market structure. So we can just see that many firms, producers, or sellers in one side, or one seller in the other side. So that explains what kind of market structure we are facing. Second thing is relative size. So obviously, two companies with the same number of firms, they are not necessarily equivalent in terms of their market structures, right? So you can have 10 firms in market A, but one firm is large and big enough to almost rule out the other firms, or we have market B with 10 firms in it, almost all these firms are relatively on the same side. So the competition is way bigger in the market B compared to market A. So we need to look at the concentration or relative size of the firm compared to the total size of the market. And then we need to look at technological and cost condition and demand condition, and also whether this is easy or difficult to enter or exit the market. So let's start with size of the company. Let's say that the number of companies are easy to count, so we can look at that. But how about the concentration? Measures the size distribution of firms within the industry is a thing that we need to as a factor, is a key when we want to study industry's concentration. The question is that are there many small firms or are there few large firms in the market? So if you know this one, if you basically look at the size of the company, so the best measure that we can find to study or calculate the concentration of firms in that industry, the best measure for us would be the sales of the company. Something relatively acceptable with everyone that sales, the total sales of the company would be a best measure for us. So how do we calculate the first index in order to calculate concentration? The first index is called C4 or 4-firm concentration ratio. 4-firm concentration ratio is basically the fraction of total industry sales generated by 4 largest firms in that industry. What do we do in this case? We're going to sort the sales of the entire firms in the market, and then rank them from top to bottom, from the highest to the lowest, and then pick the 4 largest companies in the market, and in terms of the sales, add them together, and then compare the sales of these 4 largest ones with the total sales that we have in the market. And this ratio tells us whether we have, let's say, that 80% of the market, or 70% of the market, or 50% of the market generated by these 4 largest firms in the market. Another way that you can just look at that is, instead of having the information of the entire firm in the industry, which is a very difficult job to do, we're going to look at the share of the largest firms, 4 largest firms in the market. So if you have the share of 4 largest firms in the market, then you add them together, then you have concentration ratio, or C4 here, or CR4, concentration ratio number 4. And this concentration ratio number 4 is again an index that says that how many percentage of the market is being produced or covered in terms of production by 4 largest firms in the market. And the way that we can calculate, W refers to the share of the largest firm in the market. So we have S1 over ST as the share of the largest firm, and then S2 over ST, which is the share of the second largest one, which is W2, and then S3 over ST. ST here is the total sales, as we discussed in the previous slide. So S3 over ST is the sales of the 3rd largest firm, and then the 4th one is S4 over ST. And then if you add all these W's, W1, W2, W3, and W4, then you can calculate concentration ratio 4 with the same observation or definition that we have. But the problem with CR4 or concentration ratio 4 is we only look at 4 largest firms in the market, and we ignore the rest of the firm in the market. So we basically rule out the effect of other firms in the market, and as if they don't exist in the market at all. Okay, so their production comes in the total sale or SD, but they don't play an important role in defining the structure of the market. But don't forget that we are going to rank all firms in the market from the highest to the lowest, and then we pick the four largest one. But what if the fifth one is very, very close to the fourth one? So what if the fifth one is just apart from the fourth one by a couple of, let's say, $1,000 or $1 million in terms of sales? So is it a wise decision to ignore S5? What if S6, and what if the other one? So what if you are very close to S4 or S3, so you're just ruling out big firms in the market, which definitely affects the structure of the market. So we need another measure that somehow captures the role of the entire firms in the market. And that's Herfindahl-Hirschman index that you can see here. So like previous case, we're going to use, if I can, okay, so let me fix something here first. Okay, here what we have, if I use this pen to show that, this SI over ST is what we call WI, or it is the share of each firm in the market, and then we raise it to the power of 2, and then we add all of these firms' share in the market, because we count the summation or the sigma of the entire n firms that we have in the market, and then we multiply by 10,000. This 10,000 is just a makeup factor to make HHI a more readable number. In this case, as you can imagine, if you have only one firm in the market, then HHI would be 10,000. Why? Because if I only have one firm, if n is equal 1, then WI is equal 1, and therefore HHI is 10,000. And obviously, when n becomes bigger, then we are, so as you can see here, this WI is SI over ST, and then multiplied by 10,000 is the way that we calculate HHI. And I believe that, yes, here you can see that if n is equal 1, then we have HHI equal 10,000. But if n is equal 2, let's say that, just for the sake of simplicity, we assume that two firms equally distributed in the market. So therefore, HHI, by the same calculation, would be 5,000. And then if you have 4 equal-sized firms in the market, then we have 2,500. And if you have 5 equal-sized firms in the market, you have 2,000. And if you have n firm equal-sized in the market, then HHI would be 1,000. You can see that as the number of firms gets bigger, HHI drops dramatically. So this isn't, but since we are still using the entire firms in the market, relatively this number would be more reliable. And obviously, if HHI is closer to the 10,000, so we know that the market has more concentration. And if it is far from 10,000, then we have less concentration. Compared to C4, when the number is closer to 100 or 100%, which is equal 1, so concentration ratio is 1, so we have more concentration there. When it's far from 1, closer to 0, then we have less monopolistic one, and then more competition. So this is an example that you can just find on the slides. I'm going to skip the example here. When you look at the C4 and HHI in different industries, you see that these two indexes that we have here, they can basically explain different things to us, and also it can be somehow covering each other, or somehow, depending on the market structure, or depending on the industry, this market structure would be relatively different. So for instance, look at the distilleries, and you can look at C4, and then you see that 70% of the market is in the hand of 4 firms. But when you look at HHI, you see that it is 1,519. So it's not very, very high concentrated compared to the 70% that we have here. When you look at the motor vehicle industry, you see that we have 68% or close to 70%. And then on the other side, we have HHI, which is again high, but not the same way that you look at 70% by 4 largest firms. And then the snack food industry, you can see that the market is on a medium size. And when you look at C4, 50% of the market is on the hand of 4 firms. But in the other one, you see that HHI is close to 2,000. So it shows that it's relatively very concentrated. So these are the things that we have in this market. Obviously, there are some limitations of concentration measures. The most important thing, the most common one, is the global market. In calculating these two factors, we usually assume that the Bureau of the Census does not take into account the presentation or the penetration by foreign firms into to the market, let's say in the U.S. market, because of the information that we had in the previous slides, they're issued by U.S. Bureau of Census. So you need to see the role of imported good in the calculation. But usually, when we look at the market structure, we usually look at the production of the firms that we have, local businesses. But you can add other firms, other competition, other imported products like foreign producers, and definitely this will change the structure of the market. So again, you can just read the examples that we have here. Another thing here is that the way that you define national, regional, and local markets. In many industries, the relevant markets are local and may be composed of only a few firms. When the relevant markets are local, the use of national data tends to understate the actual level of concentration in the local market. So this is very important when you are doing any research, when you want to define the industry, the geographical borders of the industry. You need to look at the concentration based on that, the data that provides the information of that geographical area, not the global or the regional or national data. So that's very important to see that. Another thing is that the way that we define the product class matters here as well. The definition of product class is also important. Whether you put, let's say that you want to put juice in the soft drink or not. For instance, you can just assume that soft drinks are only pops, like carbohydrate drinks, or you want to add any juice in this category, right? So then then, or iced tea, for instance, in this category, then the definition of soft drink would be different. Or when you're talking about, let's say, the motor vehicle industry, do you like to let's say that sport cars in this category, and do you want to compare sport cars with trucks and trailers, or you just want to look at a family car like SUVs, or do you add electric cars in this category or not? So these are the things that you need to be aware of that. The third feature that we have, so we discussed the number of firms and we discussed the size of the firm and the concentration. Another thing that we need to know is whether the industry are labor-intensive industries or capital-intensive industries or technological-intensive industries. So industries differ in regards to the use of technology and the technology that you can just use in order to produce goods and services. So this is very important in when you are dealing with industry, and obviously when the industry is huge, or the industry when industry when this industry depends on more capital, so less firm can enter this market and then compete. So therefore, market would be more concentrated, more monopolized. Or maybe the market is very labor intensive and then you don't have enough labor. And then because of that, those firms that can have access to cheap labor would be more successful in the market and more dominant in the market. So depending on what kind of market structure or market the technology requires in the market, and the cost comes with that. So we can just vary between very competitive to very monopolistic ones. So this is very important to look at the technology aspect and the cost aspect of it. Another feature that we need to consider is the concept of demand and market condition. What does it mean? So we know that industries with low demand may imply few firms, and industries with high demand may imply many firms. So how can we summarize this in our analysis? So we use the concept of elasticity that we discussed in chapter 3 as a proxy for low and high demand in the market. So, and then we can construct an index here, which is called the Rothschild index, to measure the sensitivity to price of a product group as a whole relative to the sensitivity of a quantity demand of a single firm to change in its price. So here, Rothschild index is the ratio of elasticity of the total industry, the total companies, total firms in a specific industry compared to the elasticity of one single firm. Let's say that we're talking about producing electricity in British Columbia. So the industry is electricity provided in the British Columbia. And therefore, in this case, the group of firms, the group of producers, this product group contains one firm, and therefore elasticity of the total industry and elasticity of the firm would be the same. So it would be the same, and therefore Rothschild index would be 1. So if Rothschild index is close to 1, that shows that elasticity, that shows that the market is monopolized. And if it is far from 1, so closer to 0, then it shows that the market is more competitive, because as more firms enter the market, elasticity of the total industry changes, and the elasticity of the firm in that industry becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, because more firms enter the market, and then elasticity for the firm becomes bigger, and therefore the ratio of Rothschild index becomes smaller and smaller and get closer to 1. Again, this is an example that you can see here, very simple example. You can find it on the slide. I'm going to skip it to make the video short. You can just read that later on the slides. So this is the table that shows different industries, and then own price elasticity of demand, and then own price elasticity of demand for a representative firm. So this is own price elasticity. On the second column on the left, you can see the own price elasticity of market demand. So this is basically E of T, and then we have E of F here for a representative firm. And the Rothschild index here is E of T over E of F. And as you can see, this Rothschild index is closer to 0. That shows that the market is more competitive, which is an easy case to see in the food industry. But when you look at, let's say, that tobacco industry, it's very highly concentrated. Or chemical industry, it's very highly concentrated. But again, in textile industry, when you look at the number, it's 0.32. So it's very competitive compared to the other one. Petroleum is again very highly concentrated. So this would be another measure that can explain what would be the market structure for us: very competitive or very monopolistic or concentrated. The last things before I finish this part of the chapter, the first part of this chapter, is a potential for entry. So optimal decision by firm in industry will depend on the ease with which new firms can enter the market. So the question here is that if I want to enter to a market structure, to a new market structure, is it easy for me to enter or not? What kind of obstacles or barriers to entry may I see in this situation? Maybe one obstacle is capital requirement. I need a huge capital to start, let's say, that steel industry, right, or cement industry, or pharmaceutical industry. It requires huge capital to start a business. So it's very difficult to enter this market. Compared to the restaurant industry, let's say that, which is, or food industry in general, relatively easier to enter. Patents, if some specific product requires to have the patent, so this makes it very difficult to enter the market. Patent licenses or any other certificates that you need to get in order to enter the market, these are basically the obstacles that you need to overcome. So therefore, it makes it much more difficult for firms to enter the market, and the market becomes more concentrated, more monopolized. And finally, economies of scale. Sometimes you need to produce huge number of output in order to make the production reasonable, or the cost of production for you on average becomes less. If you don't produce at a huge scale, so therefore you need to charge higher because the average cost is high and the marginal cost is high. That's the reason that we have natural monopoly, which is basically saying that most of utility companies, like gas companies, like oil companies, like electricity companies, they tend to be monopolized by the government. They don't allow competition in electricity or in the gas industries, because this competition means less production for each firm. So then each firm is going to need to charge higher, and eventually it would be not in favorable of consumers. So economies of scale is another barrier to entry in this case. So I'm going to stop here. In the next video, I'll go through the conduct and discuss the conduct part, and we'll come back with behavior of the firm. So we are done with the first part of this paradigm, this framework. The next video will cover the behavior of the firm.
哎，好了得，啊，继续录。
继续录。然后呢？这是结束了吗？
我不知道。
我说这录制是结束了吗？
录制没有啊。
录制没结